Welcome to episode 334 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak encouragement into the hearts of educators and get you informed and energized for the week ahead. Today, we are talking about rethinking effort, expectations, and balance through the lens of being a type A or a type B person. Visit truthforteachers.com for an easy-to-read, easy-to-share version of this podcast episode. This ep is brought to you in part by a podcast that I think more educators and families really need to hear. It's called Opportunity Gap, and it's one of those shows that fills in the missing pieces that we don't always get from formal PD or teacher prep. The host, Julian Saavedra, is an assistant principal in Philadelphia with nearly 20 years of experience in public schools. He brings both his lived experience and a deep sense of empathy to every conversation, whether he's talking with child psychologists, parents, or other educators in the field. You'll find episodes on everything from the gaps in federal funding for special ed to how dyslexia often gets missed in students of color. These are real-world challenges that we face, and Opportunity Gap offers real strategies for addressing them. It's a great resource for teachers and also one that you can recommend to families. To listen, just search for Opportunity Gap in your podcast app. That's Opportunity Gap. Today's episode is inspired by 3 loosely related listener questions that all touched on a similar theme, which is about how to navigate effort, expectations, and balance, both for ourselves and for our students. And before we get started, I do want to mention that if you have your own question and you would like it to be answered in a future episode, head over to truthforteachers.com/podcast. And you can share your question there with me. I have a SpeakPipe embed so you can actually say your question, or you can just type it into a form. I love hearing from you all, and sometimes the questions that you submit end up shaping an entire episode, which is the case today. I wanted to combine these 3 listener questions into one conversation because I think so many of us wrestle with these same issues. It just manifests in different ways. And that's really illustrated through what these teachers are writing in about. So one person wrote in saying, you feel like you're pushing yourself all the time. You're pouring every ounce of energy into teaching, even when your body or your health says to stop. Another shared that they struggle to push at all and sometimes feel guilty, like they use mental health as a reason to hold back. And one of you asked about how to support students in finding the right balance, helping those who overextend themselves and those who underextend themselves, without feeling like you have to tailor every single lesson to every individual's preferences and needs. So today's episode is going to touch on all of these questions because they all come back to the bigger theme of knowing yourself, of managing your own energy, and navigating effort in a healthy and sustainable way. So we're going to think it through, starting with identifying if you are a type A or type B teacher. And we'll look at how to adjust your expectations, especially during seasons when your energy is lower than it used to be. We'll also consider how those tendencies show up in your students and how to help your students know when to push and when to pull back. So let's start by defining what I mean when I'm talking about type A and type B tendencies. This is a theory in psychology where people have been grouped into these 2 categories. We're approaching it very loosely and broadly here. Don't get too caught up on labels. You'll recognize yourself immediately in one of these 2 descriptions. Type A teachers are wired to do as much as possible. You are the type of person who feels guilty if you don't grade every paper perfectly and leave optimal feedback for students, or you're constantly thinking about what more you could do for students. You push yourself even when you're exhausted. Type B teachers naturally take a slower, steadier approach. So if this is you, you might prioritize your mental health or your boundaries. But sometimes you hold back too much, or you feel like you're not doing enough to stretch yourself, and that you're kind of maybe taking too many shortcuts. There's a yoga teacher at my local studio whose name is Merlin, and she often says to us in class, if you tend to do too much, challenge yourself to do 5% less in this posture. And if you tend to do too little, challenge yourself to do 5% more. And I have found myself hearing her voice in my head sometimes when I feel like I should be doing a little less or a little more and challenging myself. And around that 5%, it's been a really useful framework for me in a lot of other contexts. It's really about noticing your natural tendencies, your habits, your limits, and where you might be overextending or holding back. And when you're able to recognize those patterns, you can make internal adjustments, not huge radical shifts, just small nudges. Those 5% changes can be enough to create better balance without overwhelming yourself because you're overriding your natural tendency. Over time, making small mindful adjustments really adds up, and you can start seeing big differences in your energy, your focus, and the results with whatever it is that you're trying to do. In other words, knowing yourself is the first step to sustainable growth, both on the yoga mat and in teaching and in life. Now, I want to pause here to address a listener question that is related to this idea of paying attention to what you need. She asked, what happens when your energy levels and physical capabilities change? And here's what she wrote. I would love to hear something about reworking our expectations of ourselves in tough seasons. I was diagnosed with a chronic illness a year ago, and I'm having a hard time internally adjusting my expectations. I've changed teaching positions, and I believe what I can offer is worthwhile, but it's hard knowing that if I had more energy, I could give more. I'm looking for more examples of those who are navigating teaching with chronic illness. And aside from people who are pushing themselves along with lots of toxic positivity, there just isn't much out there. If this sounds like you, I want to point you toward episode 124 of Truth for Teachers. It's called 4 Ways Teachers with Chronic Pain or Illness Can Maximize Productivity. That episode gives specific tips for making use of limited energy or capacity. So that's episode 124. It's a good listen for anyone in this situation. I also want to mention episode 300, which is about teaching through hormonal changes. And the reason that I mention that is because if you are postpartum, if you're in perimenopause like I am, or if you're menopausal, your relationship with your body changes. It's not what it used to be. And your moods or your energy levels, your physical capabilities might be different from day to day in a way that you're just not used to. And being able to adjust to that and to allow for that to work with your body instead of against your body is super important. So if that sounds like you, check out episode 300. I interviewed Dr. Jen Gunter, and she is an expert in these kinds of hormonal changes, and she has great advice for that as well. Here today in this episode, let's stay on this topic of reworking expectations of ourselves during those times where we just can't give our best. Teaching requires an enormous amount of cognitive capacity and emotional labor, and that hits especially hard when teachers are navigating chronic illness, burnout, seasons of low energy, or just other disruptions. Here's the truth. Teaching with less energy doesn't mean that you are failing. It means your value isn't measured by how much you can physically do. It's measured by the impact you have when you show up thoughtfully and consistently, even if the way that you show up looks very different from the way that you used to. So if for any reason you're feeling like you need to pull back or that you're expecting yourself to be a type A in a season when you can't, give yourself permission to reprioritize. Take a hard look at your tasks and ask, what really moves the needle for my students? And consciously focus on those high impact tasks that genuinely support learning and growth, and ease up on your expectations for yourself on the rest. So let's weave in now some advice for type A teachers and for type B teachers. Type A folks need to set boundaries. It's really important to remember that your energy is finite and you have to schedule it around the work that truly matters. Protect that time like it's sacred. That might mean blocking off planning periods for deep work, saying no to additional committees or projects, or creating space for yourself to recharge. Type A folks need to redefine what good enough means for them. Perfection is a trap, and often they tell themselves, I don't need things to be perfect, I just need them to be to my standards. But expecting yourself to be held always to this arbitrary standard of what things looked like when you were performing at your optimal best, that's the trap of perfectionism, especially when your energy or your time is more limited now than it was at this time when you were performing at your optimal standard. Good enough doesn't mean careless or lazy. It means steady, meaningful effort that supports your students' growth. So sometimes good enough looks like a lesson that is polished, but not perfect. Grading that is thoughtful, but not exhaustive. Or a classroom environment that is loving and structured, even if it doesn't look exactly the way you would want it to look if you had an unlimited amount of time, energy, and resources. Type A teachers, remember, even small shifts, those 5% adjustments, can create more sustainable work habits, reduce your stress levels, and model healthy effort for your students. Now, what about Type B teachers? Well, I am one of you. My tendency is to do the least amount possible. I am not competitive. I don't find myself getting motivated to do more when I see other people do it more. I have an internal locus of control. I really just don't care very much about keeping up with other people or external rewards. And I tend toward conserving energy. I tend toward not doing anything that isn't required unless I really, really enjoy it and I want to do it. So in my yoga class, that encouragement from Merlin to challenge yourself 5% more, that's for me because I'm one of the folks who has no qualms about resting and not pushing myself. I will lower those knees in plank in a heartbeat. And I say this with no judgment toward myself because I know there's folks in my classes who are exhausted, but they force themselves into the most advanced poses even when their bodies are begging them to come out of the pose. And their challenge is to do 5% less, to ease up, to stop trying to push themselves to do their absolute best and accept whatever their body needs in that moment. So neither Type A nor Type B is better. There are pros and cons to each way. This is really just about awareness and knowing what you personally need. So if your natural temperament is a Type B, you probably need to push yourself. You probably need to look for small, intentional ways to not let yourself off the hook. Look for areas where you can stretch a little bit, where you can give 5% more effort in your planning or in your teaching or in your engagement of students. This is consciously nudging yourself out of your comfort zone in manageable, meaningful increments. So try adding a new interactive activity to a lesson, just one, or committing yourself to doing one more challenging task or taking on one new skill that you want to learn, and reflect on the impact. Take time to notice the difference your small pushes make. When you challenge yourself, even just a little, you often notice improvements in the results and in how you feel. And you can use those positive outcomes to push yourself a little bit more. For Type B teachers, the focus needs to be on avoiding stagnation and finding that sweet spot between comfort and challenge, discovering the satisfaction that comes from steady, intentional growth. Now, this being an educator podcast, of course, whenever we learn something new, our natural inclination is to want to teach it to others, right? And I'm sure some of you are thinking, I have a student who really needs to hear this. You might be thinking of a perfectionist student who gets upset when they make really human and understandable mistakes. Or you might be thinking about a student who seems perfectly satisfied with giving D- level effort to every assignment. This is how one listener described the dilemma. He wrote, "How do we help students navigate and Listen to how one Truth for Teachers listener described this problem. How do we help students understand and navigate the balance of mental health and self-care with pushing themselves academically? The ones who don't need to push themselves do and are super stressed out. And the ones who never push themselves seem to use boundaries and self-care and mental health as a reason not to do any work. How do we help teens see themselves honestly and realistically? How do we send the right messages to each type of kid while not individualizing everything for everyone? I'm lost." And I so feel that. I thought that question was so beautifully worded. That is exactly the dilemma. And you all know I hate this pressure for teachers to figure out every kid's individual backstory, family situation, trauma, personality type, learning styles, interests, preferences, and so on. And then customize every aspect of every lesson under the umbrella of personalized learning or differentiation. This is ideal, but it's unrealistic. Most teachers do not have the support, the time, the resources, or the energy to do that every single day, all day long, for every lesson and every student. That's just reality. And my solution, as many of you know from hearing me beat this drum so many times over the years, is to teach kids how to understand themselves and communicate about what they need so they can advocate for themselves rather than depending on adults to cater everything to them. That's the whole point of my Finding Flow curriculum resources, is helping kids understand what they need, understand how they learn, and meet their own needs instead of looking to adults. So you can do that same thing here. Talk to your students about type A and type B tendencies. If you think your class or a small group of students would really benefit from this, teach them what type A and type B looks like and ask them to self-identify. So for older kids, it could be 3 simple questions. This is nothing you grade. It could just be a tool for reflection. And you could even just do this as a class discussion because I think the interactions would be really interesting. So you could ask them, when you get an assignment, do you tend to over-prepare and double-check everything? Or do you often do the bare minimum just to get it done and over with? When you make a mistake, how do you react? Do you get stressed and feel like you failed and get really hard on yourself? Or do you shrug it off and move on without much reflection? And how do you feel about pushing yourself? Do you feel like you should always give 110%? Or do you prefer to take things at your own pace and avoid extra effort? If you have younger students, the questions might sound something more like this. When you get a new assignment, do you check it a lot and try to make it perfect? Or do enough to finish it and move on? When you make a mistake, do you get upset and worry that you did it wrong? Or do you shrug it off and keep going? And when you try something new or hard, do you feel like you have to do your best work and try your hardest all the time? Or do you like to go at your own pace and only do what feels easy? So once you have presented this quiz to students where they can kind of self-reflect, explain that if they related to the first part of each example, they might be type A learners, where you like to do your best and you sometimes push yourself a lot. Remember that it is okay to take a break and focus on what really matters. If you resonated much more with the second example in each question, you might be a type B learner. You like to take it easy and go at your own pace. Remember that it's okay to challenge yourself a little more. It's good to see what you can do. Once kids understand if they're the type who likes to push themselves and needs to pull back, or if they're the type that holds back and needs to push themselves, then you can start using that as a cue in your ongoing instruction. So for example, let's say that they're taking a very important timed test. Tell the class, during this test, I need your best work. Type A's, please don't get stuck making it perfect. Make sure you are not overthinking it because it's a time test. You have prepared. Now all you have to do is do your best. You are ready for this. Type B's, this is a moment where you want to push yourself. You can ease up afterward because we're going to play a really laid back and fun game. But for right now, during this test, I want you to really lock in, focus your attention, find that flow state, give 100% effort, even when it's hard and you want to give up. Because it's really important that you do your best as a type B in this moment. Now, chances are you already know who is a type A and who is a type B in your classroom, but your students likely don't understand this about themselves yet. So when you're encouraging them, you know which students need pushing and which students need to be pushed less, but they don't necessarily understand that about themselves. So that's where this can really be helpful. And emphasize this is not about labeling students or boxing them in. It's about having a vocabulary to describe yourself. And you can model for them. If you're type A, reference that. Talk about how you deal with the extra pressure that you put on yourself. If you're type B, talk about how you have to motivate yourself to keep pushing through when things are hard. You can also give flexible options and build reflection into assignments. And that can really help kids understand what type they are and whether to push or to pull back. So for example, if you're assigning a project, Let students choose the depth, the length, or the approach that they're going to go into for the project. Prompt them with questions like this. How much do you want to push yourself on this? What is a realistic goal for you? That encourages kids to calibrate effort for themselves instead of constantly measuring themselves against their peers, or looking to you and asking, is this right? Did I do it right? Is this good? Is this enough? Over time, they will develop self-awareness and learn how to manage their own effort in a healthy and sustainable way. So let's summarize what we covered today, because there were a lot of seemingly disparate ideas, and I want to make sure I've connected the dots on these things for you. First off, recognize your own type A or type B tendencies, and if you need to challenge yourself more instead of letting yourself off the hook, or if you need to give yourself more grace by listening to your body and being responsive to your own needs and limitations. Then use small adjustments, maybe just 5%, to shift toward better balance. Give less effort when you tend to overextend, and give more effort when you tend to hold back. Thirdly, adjust your expectations for yourself, especially in seasons of low energy or chronic illness. Your worth is not measured by how much you can do. Think about the thoughtfulness, the care, and the impact that you bring to your work. More is not always better. If you need a good reminder of this in depth, get my book, Fewer Things Better: The Courage to Focus on What Matters Most. And finally, help students reflect on their own effort realistically so that they understand what they personally need in order to be successful. Model for and teach kids how to coach themselves through increasing effort in a challenge or letting themselves hang back a bit. Your takeaway truth for the week ahead is this: your impact as a teacher is not about doing as much as possible. It's about doing what matters most, thoughtfully, intentionally, and sustainably. Pay attention to your own patterns. Make small, mindful adjustments, and give your students the tools to understand how to do this for themselves. Have a great week. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it.